Hello, I am Mike Z. This is the Z Technique. I'm here with Ollie Tarvet, and we're here to talk about tennis and the 5 facets of fitness: movement, sleep, recovery, nutrition, and mindset. Ollie, as we look at this video of your tennis practice today, tell me some of the things that you're looking for in your movement life.
Yeah, I mean, with my movement, the main thing I'm looking for is stability. I think that's the key to success. I've realized as I've matured and got better as a tennis player that usually the less that's going on, the better. As I said, staying grounded is a really big part of something that I value in my tennis game, and especially kind of just delaying that like firing of the hip is really important for me, and just making sure that the power that I do get is coming from fluidity, and it's coming from things kind of coming into alignment and working in unison, and a big part of that is movement.
That's a great thing to focus on in practice. How is that different than competition?
Yeah, I mean, in competition, I think obviously it's a little bit more hectic, and obviously I think a little bit less structured, because I think in practice it's you're hitting cross court, so you kind of know where the ball's going to go, whereas obviously in points it's a lot different. You don't know what's going to go on. I think there's a lot more variables in it, so I think you have to be a lot more explosive, and sometimes you can't always be as balanced as you want. But I still think even in points and in matches, I try and stay as grounded, as stable, as low as I can, because as I said, that's what I think over the years has given me the most success. Just sustaining quality and sustaining consistency over a match. I think that's what's really been the factor that's got my game to the next level. Yeah, I think just to summarize, I think it's just in competition, even though it's a little bit more hectic to say, I still
Absolutely.
really try and value those fundamentals.
That sounds good. Let's talk about how you get there with your strength training in the gym, with weight training, and also functional training. Tell me a little bit about that type of movement.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think in the gym, I try and really focus on strength with my legs. I think that your force comes from the ground up, and you have to really have a strong low base that you have to sustain for potentially like 3.5 hours, and you got to train for that in the gym. And I think you've got to put your legs and your lower half under quite a lot of pressure and strain to build up that strength. So I'm doing a lot of compound movements, like squatting, deadlift, Bulgarian split squats, really kind of, and a lot of single leg stuff as well, because with tennis it's a lot of single legs. You're moving
Absolutely.
from one leg to the other, and kind of transferring that weight from your left side to your right side, or your right side to your left side. So I think it's really important to have great stability in one leg. So because there's a lot of time where most of your it's rare in tennis that your weight is 50-50.
Absolutely. Is that something that you specifically train for, that unilateral work or that imbalance work?
Yeah, I think I definitely do. I try and incorporate a lot of single leg stuff into my program. As I said, the Bulgarian split squats, I usually with my more explosive stuff that I do with my lower body, I do like single leg hops and stability as well. Like on a Bosu ball, for example, like really trying to get the stability in my left leg to make sure I have that balance. And then for my upper body, it's maybe not as much strength work. Of course, you need to be strong, like overhead, especially with the serve and pronating. But I think for me, my injuries have come from the upper body, and a lot of it is just making sure that I keep that elasticity with my arms and my shoulder, but also making sure that I, in valuing flexibility and end of range motion, and having strength in that end of range, because that's what's allowed me to stay healthy with my upper body. Because, as I said, that's where I've had most of my injuries throughout my career.
Well, that's a perfect segue to talk about recovery. So another facet is in how much you get beat up on the tennis court. How much time do you have to recover? So, Ollie, that's a great segue to the next part of the conversation is recovery. How your body gets beat up in a tennis match over a period of time and then having to do a quick recovery. What is your short-term recovery protocol? And let's say, what is your recovery protocol for, let's say, 1 day or 2 days?
Yeah, so after practice straight away, I like to get a stretch in, just kind of flush out the lactic acid and also make sure I'm getting some protein in. You know, like I try and aim for half an hour, like, you know, from the last ball hit, trying to get at least like, you know, a protein shake in, or, you know, just a source of chicken, ideally like a whole food source of, you know, of protein, but sometimes it's not always accessible. So that's what I try and do within my anabolic window.
That sounds like great timing.
Yeah, but yeah, and then that's kind of like the short, and, you know, if I am feeling really beat up, I've had a really tough session, that's the last session of the day, then, you know, maybe I hit a cold plunge, and then, you know, I like to do contrast. You know, I'm not a massive fan of just straight cold plunge, because I find my muscles get, you know, just a little bit tight. And
right, you mentioned that you wanted to always finish warm.
Yes,
with
exactly.
a good blood flow.
Yeah, that's just what I feel good with. I feel that if I end warm, then you know, kind of my muscles still feel looser, and, you know, especially going on to the next day of practice, I kind of, you know, I'm not waking up like really stiff. You know, I still have, you know, obviously from the sleep, and a little bit stiffer than I was the night before, but, you know, I'm still not feeling, you know, completely locked up.
So how do you go about that? Let's say a flush out, like a lymphatic drainage. Do you go with like compression sleeves, massage, assisted stretching, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, the main form of recovery that I find helps me is massage. I think it's, you know, just a personal preference. I know everyone, you know, reacts differently, and you know, their body kind of recovers better to different recovery methods, but the best one for me I found is massage, especially when it's not like, you know, it's still deep tissue, and you're still, you know, loosening up the tissue, and you kind of, you know, flushing out all the lactic acid, but it's not like a really, really intense massage, because then I can just feel a little bit bruised the next day.
So it's not therapeutic like a myofascial release.
No.
It's more of a sports massage, like a lymphatic.
Yes, exactly. But, you know, it's enough to where it's, you know, recovering muscles and breaking down that muscle, you know, that tissue. But at the same time, as I said, it's not beating me up, so I'm feeling like really loose the next day. You know, I have like really good range of motion, and I find that's what, you know, I find best, and, you know, that's why I see a massage therapist at least once a week, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I try and go for 2 times, especially if have a, you know, pretty heavy volume of training, and it's something that I find is, you know, like, I'm very willing to invest in a massage therapist twice a week, because, you know, that's what keeps me.
That's a great payoff with the investment, that's for sure.
Exactly. It's what keeps me on court, and at the end of the day, you know, I'm willing to spend a lot of money on, you know, what's going to keep me on court and what's going to keep me healthy, because consistency is the key to any success in professional sport.
Absolutely. The recoveries kind of blend into other categories like nutrition, like you mentioned, and also sleep. So tell me about your sleep life and how you think you're doing as far as optimizing your sleep and your rest.
Yeah, you know, I try, and I think sleep is, you know, just as important as anything else. I think it probably is the most important, you know, aspect of recovery, not only for physical health, but also mental health. You know, if I'm not getting enough sleep, you know, not only am I tired physically, but mentally I'm just not as alert, I'm not as focused. You know, I just feel drowsy the whole day. And it's something that, you know, I really try and prioritize. Like, I try and, you know, I don't try and go to bed later than 11 p.m. And, you know, I try and make sure that, you know, I have like at least 15 minutes, 20 minutes just to relax. You know, like, I honestly like listening to some like just calming music before bed or something like
Sounds
that.
great.
You know, just so like I kind of have a window just to calm my brain down before, you know, I sleep. And, you know, I try and eat not too late as well, so my body's not digesting anything, or, you know, using blood flow and energy to digest anything. And yeah, I try and get to bed before 11, as I said, and you know, at least get like 8.5. I find like 8.5, 9 is about my sweet spot. You know, obviously, if I'm really tired, then I'll go for more. But I'm usually setting an alarm for about 8.5 hours, 9 hours. And the only exception to that is when I have my rest day, I don't set an alarm, and I kind of just let my body wake up.
You wake up naturally.
Yeah, when it's
That
ready
sounds
to wake
awesome.
up. Exactly.
Sounds terrific. And that leads us to the last question or the last category is mindset. It sounds like you've got all the other 4 categories pretty well set. Tell me about the mindset of your tennis career. What is the why? Why tennis? Why competitive tennis? And why elite competitive tennis? Why do you want to keep going? And what's your goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think the why for me is that I just enjoy the process. I kind of enjoy the day-to-day of, just working towards getting better at something, and I find tennis very fulfilling with that. I don't think, even if it wasn't tennis, I still think, if it was any other sport, I would still find fulfillment in it, just because I enjoy just the process of getting better and working towards something day in, day out, and having that consistency with it. I think that's, one of the main reasons why I enjoy tennis, and why I found a lot more fulfillment from, tennis as opposed to school, because obviously those are, I think, the 2 main aspects of a lot of people's lives, especially student athletes, is, you have the athletics, but also the academics. And I find, what's really fulfilling with athletics is that, that you can't get content, because there's always variation. You don't, even if you prepare for 4 hours, 5 hours training every single day, you still don't know, like, your opponent could just play too good. And I kind of enjoy that uncertainty of competition, that you could do everything right and still not end up is winning a match or a tournament, because just things didn't go your way. You could be ill, or the court might not suit your game as you would like it. And I find, like, academics, you don't quite get that, because you kind of know what exactly what you're getting, going into the exam what you're getting. And I feel like it's a bit of a means to an end.
Right. And it sounds like you enjoy the process.
Yeah.
And your mindset is process oriented.
Exactly. Yeah. I just enjoy the fact that, you kind of, tennis just always leaves you a little bit on edge. It always leaves you wanting for more, because you never know if it's going to be enough. Whereas I find other things in life, you kind of know that, if you study for, 10 hours, you're probably going to get an A. Whereas in tennis, you train for 10 hours, you don't know, your opponent could train for 11.
Nothing's guaranteed.
Exactly, you just don't know.
Well, that sounds awesome. It sounds like your mindset is lifestyle oriented, and you're mixing all these facets of fitness together really, really well, and enjoying some success. So thank you very much for talking to us.
Of course.
Thank you, Ollie, very much. I am Mike Z. This is the Z Technique.